There's a reason why some elders who speak about being more speak about it from a point of unity rather than division. They know this. It is up to us to read this and to corroborate that with the fact that they're telling you about unity from the sense of being a Moor, not unity from whatever else people call themselves. Because that term Moor is a blanket pedigree that brings all of you together and ties you back to the old treaties you have with your brothers and sisters from other continents. It ties you back to those treaties because those treaties acknowledge the fact that all these continents used to be one before it split. And guess what? Just like some people from one part of the world will fund the building of some structure in another country, and then because they funded it, now they have interest on that land. That's what the United States did with the treaty that they signed in 1866 with the Seminoles. A provision of the article, because you will repeat that same thing over and over again. And I'm slowly beginning to see that with black people who are saying, okay, I'm not black, I'm an Indian, I'm not black, I'm a Moor. And then they start going into this state of mind of feud with their own people. And I'm like, oh, you missed the whole point of you finding information out. If you're finding information just to use it as a form of feud, then you're missing the whole point. And that thing that you think you are is not going to take you too far. And no one else. See, there are ancient treaties that you here in Americans have with people in West Africa, the Yoruba people, the Fulani, the Hausa, those people, you have treaties with them. None of those treaties will be evocable unless you figure yourself out here, because there were contingency clauses in those treaties whereby it can only be activated unless all of you came together here first. That is what I care about, and where you're going and how doors will open up for you. Other people in other part of the world that know about the ancient treaties that ties you to them will not begin to have conversation of certain nature with you unless you are truthful to yourself. Because being truthful to yourself about what your flaws are, it's part of the attribute of what an upright man is. And unless you're upright, other Moors would not want to have anything to do with you. I'm just being forthcoming with you because this is the nature of conversations that occur privately among other Moors from other part of the world. The Civil War was amongst the so-called tribes and confederacies of the natural people here. Cherokee, Seminole, Quapaw, Shawnee, they were the ones supporting the United States. So when people try to tell you Moors were different and Moors were the one fighting against Indians, that's some other trash to divert you from the truth that you were fighting against you. Provided that the said sum shall be invested and held by the United States. When something is held, make no mistake, it's been held in trust. And this is $300,000 in 1866. And this trust is still being funded as we speak. And it's also yielding interest. The first few things before listening and watching this video that I want you to do is I'll be uploading this linguistic and names and tribes that's attached to certain geographical bounds in North America. It shows the language and the dialect and the family and the clans in those areas. I want you to take a very, very close look at this map and observe it closely. Start with where you currently are, because many people at North America, where they begin to figure themselves out, is they wonder, okay, what am I? The quickest way is to look at where you are. Now, granted, some people where they are might not necessarily be where their families are, but always keep in mind the principle of pairage. But nonetheless, start where you are and link that back at least to both your patrilineal grandparent and your matrilineal grandparent, and see the common factor or the location as to what we call it now. And then take a look at this map and look at the names of the specific families there. Like the name Miami, this is not an English word. The name Kaskaskia, this is not an English word. Peoria is not an English word. Cahokia is not an English word. These are family names. Seriously. Like the movie Last of the Mohican, it adds an actual significance. This is where most of the colonies are. So take a look at this map and really study it. You must have a clear comprehension of where you are relative to the things that most people speculate about. You'd be surprised what you will find. So before watching this video, take a closer look at this map. It will give you a better perspective of things. Just so you know, there's a good part of this video towards the end that is purposely removed, but it's going to be shown on the Patreon along with a copy of all these files. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back. It will be a bit misleading if I'm to just now directly start going into how to obtain lands without first shedding the light onto certain very important things when it comes to how those lands that you now have access to became what they are and why you're able to have access to those lands. Very often when people speak about taking land back, speaking about things of nationality, speaking of things of rights, they omit things that reveals their own filth. In past videos relating to tax, I think it was either the second or third part, I mentioned the fact that the current form of taxation when it comes to fiefdom of property tax had its origin in those who are true inhabitants of this North Americas and all the adjoining islands when they were busy fighting among one another. And a post relating to the same was done with child support as to how that relates to the feud. Taxes as we know it today came forth because brothers and sisters were fighting one another here in North America. And a third party came in and put that to use by using a face of soldier that's implanted through military means. The most recent ones that can be traced back affirmatively where certain people were used as an implant to subvert others is in the Transportation Act of 1717. It's been happening long before then. But that Transportation Act, whereby others were used as tool of war to dominate others, would not be possible if your own home was tight and secured. You've heard me mention that in the past, that the original people in the Americas were busy fighting one another. It was a serious, heavy, hot battle. When people speak of rights, nationality, and taking your land back, see that part of the battle they had amongst one another? They don't want to talk about that. They keep quiet about that part. But in order for you to gain what you rightfully can claim, you must be truthful to yourself. The act of omitting the truth is synonymous with fraud. When you patiently sit back and listen to someone tell you you're more, you own this, you own that, we own this, we own that here in the Americas, in other places. To those who really know how those correlate, you stop and wonder, why is this woman or man never speaking about how they were fighting amongst one another? Because that's how they fell. By the way, so you know, that term more is a pedigree. There's then nativity, and tribe are based on patrilineal reference. Clans are based on matrilineal reference. Tribes, patriarch, clans, matriarchs. There are many attributes like that. That's where you will see some so-called black people start to say, oh, I'm not a Moor, I'm a Cherokee. I'm not a Moor, I'm a Micmac. I'm not a Moor, I'm so-and-so. Those people who assert that they're so-called Indians and not a Moor, they are confusing the fact that that term Moor is a pedigree, which is a huge blanket that covers anyone under a bigger family tree. And then there are smaller family trees under that tree, is the branches of it, which is where you have all those names of the so-called Indians. The people who purport now to be Moors don't really get that part, but that's not what we're here to speak of. What I'm going to show you is that either you refer to yourself as an Indian or you say you're Moor. One thing I have found synonymous, looking from outside in, and coming from a culture whereby I know how tribe system works. I know how chiefdoms and kingdoms work. I know how empires work because it's part of the culture that I was brought up with. Most people here in the Americas, they find something within 5, 6, 10 years. They go gung-ho, and it's their sense of pride because, well, they've been deprived of power and control so much now that they figured something out. They have to rub it on someone's face, and vicariously, they perpetually enslave themselves and unbeknownst to them. Those from other part of the world that are their brothers and sisters who are looking at what's going on in the cycle of things and the pace of things. Other people from other part of the world that would otherwise ally themselves with the Moors here are discouraged from doing so because they don't want to deal with someone with that state of mind, because they understand very well that that state of mind of feud and I'm this, I'm not that, I'm a Cherokee, I'm not a Muskogee, all that trash is exactly what got them defeated. And their children, you, the one listening to this now, are suffering from that trash. And that perpetually prevents other Moors from other part of the world from allying with the Moors here. Have pride, be confident. But if you allow separation and feud to be what you perpetuate, no different than you picking up the feud that made you fall, know that no one will ally themselves with you. And in most people in the Americans speaking about them being a Moor or asserting that there's of some tribe or whatever it is that they're going on about, this is what they don't want to tell you about. The part they don't want to tell you about is the fact that they've brought in United States commercial interests because they did not like one another. And they were having the tribal treasuries taken and collect money from the United States through something called Reconstruction Treaty. These Reconstruction treaties is how most of the tribes sold out against one another. Another thing these people who go on about, with a very few exception of course, and that few exception as far as I've seen, and the ones that I've met so far physically, is just two of them, just two people. Everyone else on the internet you hear about speaking about more or this clan, that clan, all of them are either confused because they're running with some instant gratification, or they see the truth and purposefully omit it from you, the one listening. If you don't know how you fell, you will remain down, or when you somehow try to get back up, someone will keep pushing you down. And the thing is, once you realize the reason why you fell was not because of someone foreign, it was because of your own brothers and sisters here in the Americas that looks just like you. That whole thing with the East and the West Coast, that stuff is older than hip hop. Did you know that? That whole stuff's about people from the South with their Southern accent and people from the North with their Northern accent, or people from New York repping New York, all that crap, all that trash. That's something that's deeply embedded into the children by their descendants and the blood that still runs through them. And that's exactly how and why they fail. And deeply behind closed doors, in the realm most people that call themselves black are emotionally attached to, called hip hop, which they consider culture. The people who run that use that system of feudalism to separate and control and conquer, unbeknownst to the people who call themselves a fan of so-and-so, or those who say they want to go into the music industry. All that is older than you think. So now you're looking at another dynamic and another spectrum of someone who says, hey, I'm dealing with this special information. Hey, I'm dealing with the real deal. I'm not just dealing with some entertainment. They start talking about being an Indian, and they're not telling you about how they fucked themselves over. They're still lying to you. And as a caveat, if you're pale, if you're so-called WITE, and you think this is going to benefit you because someone has sold out, I'll just put this here shortly without going too deep into it and without making it sound derogatory. It's not going to work for you. But know that there is a system meant to work for you. But nonetheless, if you are dark toned, listen to this very carefully, because this is a crucial stepping stone or crossroad for you to start taking land back. Later on down the line, once you comprehend this, or as you're introduced to this, you see how 508 ties back into all these treaties. All these people speaking about being a Moor, being an Indian, if they're not telling you about the steps as to how to function with it, rather than just giving you a hype, a dopamine and serotonin high that you want to chase again by putting on a fez or by calling yourself one thing, which is good, nothing wrong with that. But you don't have the function of what qualifies that appearance, function of it by operation of how to enforce law, by knowing the standard, test, elements, and doctrines, or the function of it by knowing how you even fell in truth rather than pointing fingers. No different than so-called black people will point fingers at someone pale to say, I'm the victim of you, yet try to have some sense of entitlement and say, black don't crack, but here you are playing victim. People who are saying they're Moors and Indians are taking this thing of saying, hey, I am a real American or I'm not an African, whatever it is they're saying they are, in juxtaposition to someone else without realizing the conscious mind does not make a discernment when you make juxtapositions, rather than you actually affirmatively saying this is what you are. If you are making what you are relative to someone else, the preconscious mind does not really grasp it because it sees two information and accepts both. And whatever the imagination and true core of what you believe in and you're feeling deep in you is what the subconscious mind would override. Whatever you are, if you say you're black, Indian, or more, okay, cool. We're not here to contend any of that. We're here to show the reasonable truth behind how you fell, because how you fell will show you the path to how you will rise back. And if someone is going to tell you about how to obtain land using trust without first showing you this, they are leaving a huge blind spot in your activity that you must know. There's something called Reconstruction treaties. For those of you who are familiar with the writings of Noble Drali, that tells you your brothers from the East will come and show you certain things. I'm not here to spout some nonsense and say prophecy has been fulfilled, but I'm just telling you, listen, there are people from over the world that are watching you, and some of them are closer to you than you expect. And they are slowly revealing truths to you because they know that your own people that look like you, that will tell you you are more, would not tell you these truths because they played a role once you start digging into it, into enslaving you once upon a time in the past, and not someone foreign. If your house was organized, no pale faces will come and take your stuff. No one will role play what you are as a substitute for you. That's the truth. Reconstruction treaties. On the eve of American Civil War. This Civil War, by the way, if you're not sure, has zero to do with pale faces fighting to free some slaves from other pale faces, because some pale face is benevolent and some pale face are the evil with pitchfork. That's a bunch of trash. Civil War was the battle between Moors here in the Americas and other Moors here in the Americas, where some created a confederacy and other Moors created another confederacy. There was the Illinois Confederacy, there was the Miami Confederacy. A lot of people hear about the Iroquois, but all right, cool. That consisted of a lot of tribes and clans. But what about the other confederacies? Everyone keeps quiet about that. That's because these different pockets of confederacies were so-called Native Americans, aka the Moors, which is a blanket pedigree for anyone who was a dark-toned man or woman who functioned in a certain way. All Moors in North America had different confederacies. And when those confederacies went to war against each other, it's called a civil war. Your brothers and sisters from the same continent, but from different places, from different so-called tribes and clans, they enslaved one another. They sold each other out. You need to know this before you start claiming land. On the eve of the Civil War, which is the battle between the Moors here, when you see the faces of pale people, those were just soldiers of wars. The substitute title they gave them was they. And part of the Go West Young Man was based on the servitude of, okay, go fight these other people who are our brothers for us, but we'll use your face. And if you win their land, you can take it. We went over it in the first part of the land painting. Everything is coming together now. By the end of this video, you should be able to realize that the ones in control that's screwing people over has nothing to do with the pale-faced people think they see on the media. The one behind the closed doors look just like you. Dark-toned, big lip, big nose. The way they play the game is so great that they don't give the slightest amount of fucks what you call yourself, who you think you are, whether you look like them or not. They're playing the game on a different level that, regardless of whether you look like them or not, they don't care. The type of power that they after is different. That's the reason why I always use this term, the everyday man. I care more about you, the everyday man, than them. In my mind, when I think of someone who's controlling things behind everything else, I don't think of some pale face because I know the fact behind things. When you read small little subtle reconstruction treaties like these, you begin to see who was in control slowly, gently, subtly. And it will lead you slowly back to who really fucked shit up. Nationally, and internationally. Many people who are introduced to being a Moor or being an Indian, this tribe, this clan, this constitution and treaties of this tribe, all that pride that comes with it, which is good, they're not introduced to the fact that they fucked each other up. And if they are, they hide it. You cannot be free if you're still hiding facts from one another. What difference then does it make you from the one who you purport to be taking advantage of you if you're not revealing the ultimate truth to your people? The only thing that will bring people together is for them to realize that the trash that they've done in the past is inevitable to repeat itself now and in the future, unless they are consciously aware of it and work towards fixing it. Because the so-called United States, which was controlled by people who look like Moors, was just a front to find a middle ground and to strip power away from people who are already in a feudal system against one another. On the eve of American Civil War in 1861, a significant number of indigenous people of the Americas, a large number of people who are indigenous in the Americas, had been relocated from the southeastern United States to Indian Territory, west of the Mississippi. So sometimes you will hear some people tell you that Africans really weren't brought from that continent, whose true name, by the way, is called Asia Minor, that they were not brought there, and that they were just brought from the Americas and then they were taken over some river. Here's the truth of it. It all happened during the Reconstruction era. And the ones doing this transportation of significant amount of indigenous people, aka you, the Moor, whatever tribe you might have been, the one doing it are also people who look like you. So now you have some people say they're Indians and that Moors are different from Indians and Moors are the ones fighting Indians. You need to stop lying to yourself about how reality works. Moor, again, it's just a pedigree. It's a blanket term for bigotry of a group of people. When you go deeper into it, you will see other groups. For instance, in West Africa, there's Yoruba, there's Igbo, there's Ibibio, there's Efik, there's Hausa, there's Fulani, and so on and so forth. Those are the different families. And then those different tribes have treaties with clans, which is the matriarchal part. But all in all, research and many books have been done on it, that all of them have 99.99% similarity in genes, meaning they all belong to the same family tree. Guess what? In the Americas, you're all the same way. Call yourself a Cherokee, call yourself a Miami, call yourself a Muskogee, whatever you want. You are all family members. The quicker you stop lying to yourself, the better it is. And I know to some it might not be comfortable hearing this, but if you want to be free truly, you have to really come to that reality. So this significant number of indigenous people in the Americas that has been relocated from the southern portion in the Americas to Indian territories, meaning places now that's been demarcated as a misnomer. The one doing this transfer are no pale-faced people. The Creeks owned slaves who are also Indians. And these same Creek Native Americans deliberately, by signing treaties with the United States, which I'll show you, they deliberately misnomer their own brothers and sisters who they've enslaved by war. They misnomer them as African. Africans don't refer to themselves as Africans. They refer to themselves by the name of their fathers and mothers, by way of their tribe or clan. But guess who in the Americas began that fuckery of flipping the table and referring to their own fellow brothers and sisters who they have feud with by something else? You, here in the Americas. The Creeks did that. They refer to other people from the Americas as Africans in the treaty that they signed with the United States so that the United States can give them money. So when they say you sold yourselves out, it just didn't happen during the civil rights, whereby they get one of your own, kill one of their own like Malcolm X. The sellout didn't begin then. It was far before that point. A significant number of indigenous people of the Americas had been relocated from the southeastern United States to Indian territories, designated spots for someone to be stripped of what rightfully belongs to them, west of the Mississippi. Now think about it. Anyone in their right mind, how would they just casually listen to someone say, all right, we're going to transfer you now here. Just come over here and just stand on your 2 feet and start walking. And they go, oh, okay, we're going to do that. No one in their right mind does that unless some type of feud took place that compelled them otherwise. If there were any slave trade that took place that changed people's nationality, name, and inheritance, this is it right here. It did not happen by some pale people. I'll keep emphasizing that over and over so that it keeps ringing a bell in your mind, so you get the source of the problem. So you stop giving people who don't have any power over you a power that they don't deserve. And so that you stop looking away from the issue and realize how you fail, so that you can fix it, not with feud, but understand that you need to really come together, because no one else in the other part of the world will care about you unless you all come together. Because if you are fighting your own and you are willing to betray your own, what makes you think other people over there in other continents, Asia Major, Asia Minor, observing everything going on here in the Americas, what makes you think they're going to ally themselves with you if you are a traitor of your own brothers and sisters here? These truths have to be revealed because most of the children of these people don't even know these reality. Other people from other part of the world know it. If you don't know the reality, you might wonder why people treat you a certain way. No more of that. The inhabitants of the eastern part of the Indian territory, the 5 civilized tribes, were Caesarean nations. By the way, they were the Chickasaw, Choctaw, Seminole, Muskogee, and one more, I forgot what it was. Or Caesarean nations with established tribal governments. To be a Caesarean nation is basically the fact that you have the rights and obligation of contract, but not just nationally, but internationally, because each so-called tribes were recognized as a nation of their own. So instead of you now being a vassal of one so-called tribe, I'm not going to use an example of one tribe enslaving the other. It might even be derogatory. So say one tribe enslaved members of the other. In that process, you still have a right and obligation to enforce within those nations, because all of them uniformly adopted that principle, whereby you can still affiliate yourself with them or not, despite you still being a captive of them. That's what they in summary mean when they say they were Caesarean nations. With established tribal governments, well-established cultures, and legal systems that allowed for slavery. So all the little honey and sugar stuff that people try to tell you that we're Moors, we're perfect, we're fezzes, we're turbans, we're better than this, we're better than that, we're better than Africans, which really is just a trash term that really doesn't exist. And if one were to really put it in its proper place, it just means earth. When you look at Masonic maps, they refer to the entire place as Africa. The entire earth is Africa. So if someone is now telling you because we're Moors in Americas, we own this, we own that, we own Africans with it, this, look, that's just another hype train that's been given to you. They need to go to the core of what happened, which was they enslaved one another. Deal with the truth. And from there, know how you can work with each other, because that's how you fail. Again, I will keep repeating that because that is the core of what you need to be free. Wonder why so-called black people till today just don't like one another? Wonder why some people from one part of North America go to another place and they just don't like each other? Something still rings and just still vibrates in their blood that they don't quite know. They don't quite put their fingers on it, but all they know is that these certain people don't get along with these people, so we just get upset. When certain so-called Native Americans move from one place to the other, they start fighting with one another. That whole thing with the red and blue, those are houses that were fighting over some shit. And it still perpetuates till today. But ask a typical gangbanger what the source of it is. They would not be able to tell you. In modern times, they would tell you they came together because they were protecting their communities. But that blue and red house existed before that point also, if you dig it far back. And funny enough, the United States mimics it so much, just as much as they mimic the Constitution after your confederacies. They mimic the colors that they adopt in their form of politics The Democrats and the Republicans, red and blue. They're smearing your stuff in your face. It's like a joke. If you don't know how you felt, other people will smear trash in your face and make fun of you, and you wouldn't even realize it. This is the truth people need to entertain when speaking about nationality and rights. When people speak about them being Indians and Native Americans, so-called Africans, regardless of what part of Asia Minor they're at, they don't care if you say you're not an African. They do not care because they know what it means to be an African is a trash anyway. Only you subscribe to that concept because of what your people have gave to you. But don't worry, we'll read that too. Before European contact, these tribes were generally matriarchal societies, with agriculture being the primary economic pursuits. Remember, the bulk of the tribes lived in towns, some covering hundreds of acres. You might think, what does any of these things about Reconstruction treaties and how we were fighting against one another deals with land and me being able to get land now? It has everything to do with it. Because even if you get land the normal way, go through a realtor, purchase it, if at some point someone who knows how things work comes by and say, this is mine. I know you bought this for 100K. I know you've been living it for 2 generations, but guess what? My bloodline ties back to this treaty and this family and this and that, and therefore I'm going to take it. According to law, they can. If you are so-called black and someone is coming to you and Americans and they're doing that to you, which is coming, don't worry, you see it play out in your lifetime. All that $5 Indian stuff, they're slowly working on it generation after generation until they get to their end game. That's what I care about, to come show you that, look, they have an end game. And if you don't get your stuff together, they will finalize it and you won't even know what's happening. You think what's going on now is bad? All right. If you're so-called black and you're earning land and you don't know these, there's a problem. No matter how financially wealthy you think you are, someone will come and take it from you. And I'm not speaking of mortgage lispendence or foreclosure. I'm speaking about just take it based on treaties. When in truth, you are the one that treaty is supposed to protect. But if you don't know about how you fell and how certain treaties were reconstructed by those who were your brothers and sisters here because of feud, you will know where the solution is. Hence, we're here. The bulk of the tribes lived in towns, some covering hundreds of acres and containing thousands of people, with planned street, residential, and public areas. The people were ruled by complex hereditary chiefdoms of varying, so there's an empire and then there's kingdom, and kingdoms are under empires, and then there's something under kingdoms called chiefdoms, of varying size and complexity with a high level of military organization. So these people were organized, and before any pale faces comes, they had land, and they were fighting amongst one another, and according to their system, they had the right and obligation of contract. And according to their system, legally, they can own slaves. If your system says you can own slaves, then the reason why your system says you can't own slaves is that you do have slaves. So when it comes to so-called Moors being deprived of nationality, being called Indians, Native Americans, and then African Americans, and then Afro, and then black, all that, playing victim on that end is not sweet to the ears of someone who knows how things became and who knows who turned it that way. Again, I'm going to emphasize, I'm pointing this out because this is what most people would not point out. But the reason I'm doing so is not for the purpose of perpetuating that feud. It's for the purpose of you realizing how you fell so that you don't repeat the same thing. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. What you do not know will and is harming you. And if someone is telling you have the right to do this, you're this special, you're this unique, but they're not telling you how you fell, So know how you fell, which was feud. And make sure it does not happen again. That's why I always emphasize, I don't care what you think you look like. Deal with principles, deal with truths, and everything will work out. If you knew the thing behind this thing called power, it is the fact that you have the ability to be organized in your own house and then branch out and deal with other people who are not necessarily like you in terms of appearance, and still have them work with you in tandem with one mind. In fact, that's how most Moors in North America got their asses kicked. Because other people, their extended family members in Asia Major, Europe, and Eurasia, they came together with pale-faced people and kicked the American people's ass. That's another truth people who tell you about being Moors don't want to tell you, because, you know, when someone has a propaganda, they want to, you know, push it in a way that makes them look good the most. But I'm here to tell you, look, I have no fidelity to all that trash. You have a birthright. And the primary birthright that you have is not what you call yourself, is not the sense of entitlement or pride that you think you have because of what you put on you, but more so the birthright that you have is information. And information does not discriminate what makes you feel good and what doesn't make you feel good. If you're only perceiving information from your bias of what makes you feel good, you are then lying to yourself. If someone is giving you information that's restricted to just how good you are to feel and are not telling you, hey, okay, look, so I know I just told you all that, but look, this is how we failed despite us being great. And make sure this doesn't happen again. You and I fucked up. If they're not telling you that, they're not being real with you. As the saying goes, look, I'm just going to keep it real with you. Don't people say that? Yet they're not keeping it real with you. If all they are doing is isolating truth to you just based on what makes you feel good, something is wrong. Something is seriously wrong, because you will repeat that same thing over and over again. And I'm slowly beginning to see that with black people who are saying, okay, I'm not black, I'm an Indian, I'm not black, I'm a Moor. And then they start going into this state of mind of feud with their own people. And I'm like, oh, you missed the whole fucking point of you finding information out. If you're finding information just to use it as a form of feud, then you're missing the whole point. And that thing that you think you are is not going to take you too far. And no one else. See, there are ancient treaties that you here in Americans have with people in West Africa, the Yoruba people, the Fulani, the Hausa, those people. You have treaties with them. None of those treaties will be evocable unless you figure yourself out here, because there were contingency clauses in those treaties whereby it can only be activated unless all of you came together here first. That is what I care about. Whatever trash people are pushing, that has no significance in forward motion, but to perpetuate the same trash that made you fall. And if you look closely at every other people at any other part of the world, that's exactly how they also fall. Internal feud. Know how you get here so that you can know where you are and where you're going, and how doors will open up for you. Other people in other part of the world that know about the ancient treaties that ties you to them will not begin to have conversation of certain nature with you unless you are truthful to yourself. Because being truthful to yourself about what your flaws are, it's part of the attribute of what an upright man is. And unless you're upright, other Moors would not want to have anything to do with you. I'm just being forthcoming with you, because this is the nature of conversations that occur privately among other Moors from other part of the world. By the middle of the 19th century, the United States government has started leasing land from the 5 civilized tribes. Example, Choctaw and Chickasaw. The Seminoles are one of them. The Muskogee and the Cherokee were one of them also. So it's not just these two. See these 5 civilized tribes? Let me tell you the dogma within this term, 5 civilized tribes. These 5 civilized tribes were not the only tribe in America. There were many more. Those other many mores were the ones fighting against these 5 ones. whatever you see that United States big up and give you a thumb up and is quick to mention, know that those were the ones that worked with them to screw everyone else over. But keep in mind that this is not for the purpose of you now looking at someone from the perspective of being the bad guy. Just know the truth objectively and work with it from the purpose of forward motion. I'm telling you, something bigger is coming beyond all this trash. That if you don't get yourself together and work with other people from another part of the world, it will be worse for your children to come. By the middle of the 19th century, the United States government had started leasing land from 5 civilized tribes: Choctaw, Chickasaw, and the western, more arid part of Indian territories. These leased lands were used to resettle several plain Indian tribes that tended to be nomadic in nature. They were displaced from their lands due to war, civil war, embracing the horse culture. Even though this second part that they put here is just a dogma, because most Moors were masters at animal husbandry, and dealing with horse is one of them. So being nomadic is not the cause of embracing horse culture. This last part is just some BS they placed in here. At the extreme, the Comanche society was based on, the Comanche were, by the way, in Oklahoma, around Oklahoma, were based on patrilineal and patrilocal extended family sharing a common language. They did not develop the political idea of forming a nation or tribe until their relocation into Indian territory, meaning they had their own form of organization until someone took them as a slave of war and resettled them somewhere else. You have to see the reality of these words. At the beginning of Civil War, which is the war amongst Moors here, the Union Army was withdrawn from Indian territory, exposing the 5 civilized tribes to aggression from the Plains Indians. The Confederacy filled the vacuum. All the 5 civilized tribes, as well as the other surrounding tribes, signed treaties with the Confederacy as a part of Reconstruction. The Southern Treaty Commission was created by the Congress to write new treaties with the tribes that sided with the Confederacy. Meaning the United States, Congress, the lawmaking department of government of the United States, sided with certain, very certain tribes, which were the Confederacy. Now, when you see Confederacy, they're referring to the Confederate States. When you look into North American histories, you will hear this term Confederate States, Confederate States. Right. Wherever you see these Confederate States, these were where a large amount of Moors were that came together that wanted to side with the United States. The other people that weren't, for lack of a better term, fucking with the United States were not these people. The Moors in these part of what we now refer to as these states were the ones dealing with the United States. They were known as the Confederate States. South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina. South. But let's not deviate. The Choctaw Nation and Chickasaw Nation and Indian Territories strongly supported the Confederacy, which signed a treaty with Choctaw and Chickasaw. The Cherokee Nation, Muskogee Creek Nation, and Seminole Nation had troops fighting on both sides. There's a civil war going on. You and I are brothers and sisters. We have 2 different ideas. One of us wanted to work with the United States, which was an arm's length of our brothers and sisters from Asia Major, Europe and Asia. And the other one of us say, no, I don't want to do commerce with them. So, well, things escalated to the point of, okay, let's talk to our tribes. Let's talk to our chief. Let's talk to our king. Now let's talk to our emperor. It's not working. The emperor says, look, you are Caesarian nation. You can figure it out yourself. They go, all right, how do we figure this out? And while they're trying to figure it out, a third party, aka the representative of the United States from Asia Major, Europe, is speaking to the ears of one of the brothers saying, look, just fight these people. We'll support you. We have troops. We have the power of our king from England behind us. We have the power of the Christian patriarchs in our back. And by the way, there are about 7 Christian patriarchs, not just the Pope. The Pope, whenever the Pope goes to other part of the world, He's not going there to visit the president or to look cute waving at people on the road. He's going there to visit the Christian patriarch in that continent. Each of these powerhouses in today's world have their own patriarchs in the Christian world. Then there's the Russian one, and so and so. But anyway, the United States representative saying, look, we have the power of all the patriarchs behind our back. So fight against your brother. It's okay. You have the right. And then look, if you take this land, you'll be making more money, so and so. So they're like, you know what? Cool. We'll create our own confederacy. Fuck you, brother. I'm going to fight against you. And they're like, okay, that's what you want. Cool. Not a problem. Let's get it. They started fighting amongst one another. This is some real life stuff. This stuff goes deep, deeper than saying I'm a Moor now, Islam, or I'm an Indian. My grandfather was a Blackfoot. Okay, cool. All that's cool to say. But do you know how you got to the position you are and how to fix it? And the fact that you need to come together, that's important. The Cherokee Nation, Muskogee Creek Nation, and Seminole Nation had troops fighting on both sides. Other tribes such as Osage, Seneca, and Shawnee of the Neosho Agency and Quapaw tribes also signed treaties with the Confederacy. And so now you see that the Civil War has nothing to do with, see this right here? This, when they show you some pale people in some modern painting, and say some pictures of some small pocket of some pale people, this had nothing to do with them. They were just a tool of war being used by one side to perpetuate feud between brothers and sisters. They even self-confess to you and tell you in black and white. The Civil War was amongst the so-called tribes and confederacies of the natural people here. And guess what? The Congress went in between it and signed treaties with them as part of Reconstruction. Someone is changing history as war is going on live. And for United States Congress to do that, some Moors had to know about it because some Moors were supporting them. This is not to say some Moors were bad or good. And this is not to say Moors are different from Indians, because these Choctaw, Cherokee, Seminole, Quapaw, Shawnee, they were the ones supporting the United States. So when people try to tell you Moors were different and Moors were the one fighting against Indians, that's some other trash to divert you from the truth that you were fighting against you. That fight did not benefit you in any way. And the children of the so-called Cherokee and Choctaw that have benefited, that are now referring to themselves as black, are the multi-billionaires now that you barely see or hear about. They will tell you they have old money. Of course they had old money, because they link directly to the people that fucked all the other masses of everyday men up. You need to know that. During the Civil War, the Union Congress passed a statute that gave the president the authority to suspend the appropriations of any tribe, meaning the bribes that were given to the tribes, if the tribe is in, quote, in a state of actual hostility to the government of the United States, and by proclamation to declare all treaties with such tribe to be abrogated by such tribe. So now, by the agreement of a brother, a third party now says, look, I'm not going to give you money and I'm not going to pay you if you're fighting against us, which is me, the third party, against your brother. Submit to us. This is the dirty part of history here in North America that those telling you about nationality might not want you to know. With, of course, exception of a very few. Very, very few. They'll show you images of people wearing feathers and turban. That's good. That's important, because all those are true. But if someone is only feeding you what sweet, no different than constantly consuming sweet stuff, ice cream, sweet food, at some point it would have a detrimental effect on your health. Same applies with information. Keep consuming sweet information without the bitter truth. After a while, you will have mental diabetes. You will have equivalents of preventable disease in the mind by having a sense of pride but not knowing how the world works. By having a sense of pride but not caring enough about your fellow brothers and sisters, which you should, because that's how you fail. I don't have any fidelity to any of that trash. I'm going to give it to you exactly how it is without sugarcoating it to you. Reconstruction era. The term Reconstruction era typically covers the transformation of the Southern United States in the decades after the Civil War. And then someone now is switching things up, changing names, calling someone who was once a certain so-called Native American, now they're calling them Africans because they were enslaved by their brothers and sisters and they had a disagreement on how to handle commercial affairs. When you really think about it in retrospect, it ought not to have occurred that way. When you really look into the corroboration of information, a comet also occurred around this time that landed and changed things on another level. That was nature's law saying, look, get your stuff together. And in some case, believe it or not, during certain types of warfare, you don't necessarily have to use firearms to really get your point across. You can use nature. That's the type of warfare that some people in other continents know how to use. You used to know it too here, but you lost it. Why? Because you were busy fighting one another. And that comet that hit on Earth, that meteor, was not accidental. It was part of a tool of war. But moving on. However, the reconstruction of the Indian Territory lasted significantly longer and fostered the policy changes that impacted other tribes in the rest of the country. This is when they started playing around with your identity and your inheritance. And through this reconstruction, they created the Department of Interior, they created a committee on territories, etc., etc. You have to know this if you want to claim land. There was a Res Judicata in 1942 that inadvertently revealed the fact that brothers and sisters were selling each other out and were taking bribes from the United States. It's called Seminole Nation versus U.S. It took place in 1942. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I highly implore you to look into it yourself. That case law, according to the syllabus released by the U.S. Report Committee, which is an entity that releases things when it comes to case laws and history. So not just case laws, not like you'll go to justia.com or Wexlaws and it will list the summary and intent of a case law. This U.S. report basically links the events of case laws with histories. According to their syllabus that they occasionally release, they let you know payments by the government to the tribal treasurer of the Seminole Nation. When they say government, they're referring to the United States. Payment by the United States to the tribal treasurer of the Seminole Nation of certain amounts which by Article 3 of Treaty of 1866. This was a part of the Reconstruction Treaties that some so-called Native Americans signed against their own, so that the U.S. can take the land of their own brothers and sisters. So after they defeated their brothers and sisters, they sold that land to the United States. And then they leased that land to the United States. So you might wonder, well, why would some so-called Native Americans who look like you, the typical black man or black woman, why would they sell their lands? One will say, well, war was involved. Yeah, war was involved, but why would they sell their land? That's because brothers were fighting brothers. And when the other brother was defeated, one of the brothers sold the land of his brothers to the third party and started leasing it out to make money. As screwed up as that sounds, that's exactly what occurred. And the syllabus released by the U.S. report is telling that to you, that look, there was a Reconstruction Treaty, which is what we read earlier, the Reconstruction era, that allowed us to lease land owned by them. And we pay it to their treasury. They are telling it to you black and white of how you sold one another out. Again, as you hear these words or these series of words, such as you sold one another out, it's not for the purpose of feud. It's for the purpose of realizing you fell because of feud. Stay away from that trash. Come together and work together. Payment by the government to the tribal treasurer of the Seminole Nation of a certain amount, which by Article 3 of the Treaty of 1866, the government agreed to pay for the support of schools, which was how they introduced taxation. If you look at your property tax, a huge chunk of it is because of the school district, which of course they also used the school to basically convert people into Christianity, because part of the people that funded those civil war against those who did not want to do business with the United States were the Christian patriarchs. Therefore, the schools were Christian automatically, and they taxed them because that's their way of taking back their return of investment for funding the Civil War. It's a basic common sense thing once you know the sequence of event and who is involved. This is what some people, again, I'll keep repeating this so you realize that just because you find something on the internet, someone talking about it valiantly that makes you feel good, does not mean that's the entirety of the truth. Just because someone tells you, hey, you're a Moor, hey, you're an Indian, you're not black, cool, that's good, that is true. Just because they tell you that doesn't mean there's still not a problem with you in the equation. You have to realize, people say they don't want to pay property tax, right? How did it all come by? Part of it is because you fought against one another, you reconstructed the stuff, and then you allowed people to bring in schools as a form of returning their investment while they lease a land that you sold from your brother who you defeated because you didn't agree on how to make money. It was a money dispute. The government agreed to pay for supporter schools, which is how they introduced taxes. So they thought, okay, we're leasing lands from you and we're paying to your treasury, your tribal treasury. You're not going to get one up on us. We'll tax you through those schools that we'll put on your land. And then we'll basically subvert you. We'll strip you of your language, your culture, your dress, your state of mind. And then we'll get you to work for us. Because half of you anyway are already doing that. If we can do that with half of you, why can't we do it with all of you? That's the reality some people might not want to tell you. And don't worry, we'll show how Creeks owned slaves. And they converted the names of their own brothers and sisters to Africans. And they put it into the Reconstruction Treaty that they signed with the United States. If someone is telling you, hey, Africans were not brought from so-called Africa, because we ain't Africans, there's no proof of slave trade. They're absolutely right. Hey, I'm behind that 100%. But if they're not now telling you that, hey, we enslaved one another here, and that we are the ones who tagged one another with that name African. If they're not telling you that part, they're only giving you half of the truth. Omission of truth is synonymous with fraud and falsehood. I'm here to give you the full scope of it, a step at a time. If you want to claim any land back, you must know this, because this was how it was stripped from you. And you can only get it back if you come together and work together. When I say create express trust, create 508, and I'm saying I'm waiting for 50 people to do that, I'm not just saying that just because there are bodies of legislature that has those requirements for you to now have a body politic as a state, when each trust come together and create their treaties, which will make them entitled to obtain land. Can you do it individually? Sure you can. Is it more powerful when you do it as a treaty? Yes, you can, because it's even better. The government agreed to pay for the support of schools, satisfy the obligation of the treaty, and defeats recovery, whether payment to the tribal treasurer was authorized or not, since the schools actually received the benefit of the payment. Then this is per treaty. What's been described here is no different than saying they're being bribed. The ones who sold their brothers out were being bribed by the United States. And in turn, the United States could bring their own Christian schools into the equation. And guess what? Just like some people from one part of the world will fund the building of some structure in another country, and then because they funded it, now they have interest on that land. That's what the United States did with the treaty that they signed in 1866 with the Seminoles. A provision of the Article 6 of the Treaty of 1866, now this is the treaty with the Seminole, whereby the government, aka United States, undertook to construct at a cost not exceeding $10,000 suitably agency building. Meaning this is how we're now slowly assert our own jurisdiction into yours and make it uniform. Agency building on the Seminole Reservation, held not breached. In respect of a claim, the Seminole Nation based on the government's obligation under a provision of Article 8 of the Treaty of 1856 to establish a trust fund in a specified amount and to pay the interest therefrom to the members of the Seminole Nation per capita as an annuity. So if you say you're black and you've traced your lineage back to the Seminole, are you getting paid from the trust fund set up per the treaty in 1856? Let's just say, all right, the origin of it is bad because it's from them selling their brothers out. Okay, now you figured that out, and now you have the intent to figure things out. The question is, who is getting paid from this trust fund? Because this trust fund has not been closed till today. It still exists as you're listening to this right now. The sins of your progenitors is what you're suffering for today. So that's the reason why some paleface can play your role now and take from this trust fund. Don't get it twisted. This trust fund of the Seminole per this treaty is separate from the Social Security Administration trust fund, such as the food benefit or the insurance, all that. That's another one that's meant to subvert you as a slave. Because the moment you take those benefits, you're assumed to be a slave of the United States because they're feeding you. Whereas this Treaty of 1856 trust fund with the Seminoles is saying they're not feeding you, but they owe you, albeit the origin of it was based on treachery. That's the reason why I say in order for you to get your stuff back, you must come together, flip the game, flip things in its proper position. And then it goes on to case law so and so. I highly implore you to read this case law. The case number is 348. Seminole Nation versus the United States in 1942. Wasn't it close to this time when the whole civil rights stuff was going on? And it was in the United States Supreme Court. Read this case law at your leisure. It reveals a lot. You want to read about and know about how people sold out and were just paying money and were being paid monies till today, and people were selling lands that belonged to their brothers and sisters that fell? Read this case law, you see it. But I'm not here to incite feud, so I'll just leave it to your due diligence to read it. Because I'm certain many people have probably not been introduced to the spectrum of reality when it comes to what rightfully belongs to them. And the core truth of what the problem is. You just don't wake up one day and say, I'm a Moor, I'm an Indian, and you think that's it. You better start being truthful to yourself about how you got there and what you really need before you can rightfully claim that, because nature will not allow you to slip without responsibility. You're not going to keep slipping and sliding and skating by it and think you're going to get away with it just by assertion alone. If you're not consciously aware of this reality of Reconstruction about how you screwed one another over, it would subconsciously be played out. Most black people who hate one another, black and black crime, all that, most black people who don't like one another, it's a continuation of a field that's perpetuating itself subconsciously. And the preconscious is so powerful that it will take hold of you without you even realizing it. But the conscious mind is a tool to work the preconscious and makes you a mastermind so that you stop being a slave to genetic conditioning. A lot of people have something running through their blood right now that even they cannot control. Read what's in black and white to realize the truth and know what the solution is. Another reading I would highly suggest is volume 11, number 2 of a memorandum released in 1983, January 1st. It's called Judgments, quote unquote, Brothers Fighting Over Indian Money, the Right of Seminole Freedom to a Portion of the Indian Claim Commission Judgment Fund, by Aaron R. Brown. If I remember, I would upload this PDF and the other PDF I've just shown along with this video on Patreon. Moving on. Now let me show you how a fellow family of Moors at North America called Creeks, which Creeks are also known as Muskogees, which was one of the 5 civilized tribes. Tribal Treaties Database. Treaties with the Creek, 1866. With means there's someone else involved. We know the first party, which is the Creeks, one of the 5 civilized tribes. Who are the other party? Well, the United States. We've explained the reason why. Preamble. Whereas existing treaties between the United States and the Creek Nation have become insufficient to meet their mutual necessities, whereas the Creek made a treaty with the so-called Confederate States on the 10th of July, 1861, whereby they ignored their allegiance to the United States. Meaning, oh wait, you're getting closer to your fellow brothers and sisters, which is look at how they refer to so-called Confederate States. And because, well, look, you're getting closer to your brothers. Oh, no, we have to step in and create a treaty now that will bind you. Whereas the Creeks made a treaty with the so-called Confederate States, which were Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, the Carolinas, so and so. And Carolina was someone of nobility, which was a Moor also. And most of those states were created based on something called peerage, which was intermarrying of family. That's the reason why they're known as the 5 civilized tribes, because they have ties in a certain way based on marriages. But nonetheless, the United States is saying, look, what? One of you are getting close to one another by signing agreements and treaty among yourselves? Oh, no, we can't have that. We'll sign ours with one of you to keep separating you. That's what's going on here. Whereas the Creeks made a treaty with the so-called Confederate States on the 10th of July, 1861, whereby they ignored their allegiance to the United States. They're starting to slowly realize that, all right, these other group of Moors that don't like other groups of Moors, they seem to be getting along a little bit too well. We divided them against their own other brothers and sisters, but these 5 specific tribes are getting along a little bit too well, and it's making us uncomfortable. They might usurp us, just like they betrayed their brothers and sisters, because, well, they ignored their allegiance to the United States and unsettled the treaty relations existing between the Creeks and the United States, and did so render themselves liable to forfeit the United States all benefits and advantages enjoyed by them in land annuities, protections, and immunities, including their lands. See, the reason why I'm reading this is regarding land patent, which is the core of this video. You might think all these things that we've read so far have nothing to do with land. I'm here to tell you absolutely 100% it does. I'm going through these stages of development of things so that when you step on that soil, you know how it became what it is, as to why someone is asserting a claim over it, as to why you can assert a claim over it a certain way, the why and how, as it relates to the blood that runs electromagnetically through your veins on your artery, which makes up who you are, that directly ties to your own essence. If you don't know this, if one is void of these awareness of things and they're saying they want to claim some land, they are delusional. Because when someone now comes to you, whether as an ally or as a foe, you don't know these things, they will pull the wool over your eyes so well that at the end, all you would have experienced is loss, and you'll wonder what just happened. You'll be left with anger and you'll be confused. That's called being a victim. That's not your position in society. Especially if you say you know something about who you are and what your nationality is. Whereby they ignored their allegiance to the United States and unsettled the treaty relations existing between the Creeks and the United States, and did so far render themselves liable to forfeit the United States all benefits and advantages enjoyed by them in lands, annuities, protection, and immunities, including their land and other properties held by grant or gift from the United States. At this point, I suspect we know what land grants are. We went over that in the first part of the video. And whereas, in view of said liabilities, and the United States required the Creek a portion of their land whereon to settle other Indians. So now the United States is beginning to flip the game, slowly and steady. In their eyes, these people they signed treaty with are traitors to their own brothers and sisters anyway. So they can treat them however they want. So now the United States can begin to impose what they want to consider as a replacement for the ones that they signed treaty with, by using the same treaty that the Creeks and all the other 5 civilized tribes signed in the act of betraying their own fellow brothers and sisters. They are flipping the game on them. This is the ugly part that people who claim to be Moors and Indians will not want to tell you. If you love yourself, you will deal with the bitter truth for the purpose of removing the cause of the issue. And whereas Treaty of Peace and Amity was entered into between the United States and the Creeks and other tribes at Fort Smith, September 13 to 1865, and that's part of the treaty that created the trust fund that we just read, the bribery. It's a bribery if the element of betrayal exists. It's not when you all come together and put it to use properly. When I tell you money exists sitting for you to access, it's very real based on treaties. Just come together. Whereby the Creeks revoked, cancelled, and repudiated the aforesaid treaty made with so-called Confederate states. Meaning now they're reneging to say, oh man, we still want to make that money. So now, well, we're going to renege that Confederate state agreement that we had with the other 5 civilized tribes so that we can keep making this money. Why? Because, oh crap, the United States is now flipping the game on us to take our land. Oh no, we don't want that. So now they have to step away farther from the same people that they came together with to betray their brothers and sisters so that they can come closer to a third party called the United States. And whereas the United States, though its commissioners in said Treaty of Peace and Amity, promised to enter into treaty with Creeks to arrange and settle, when he says word settle, it's talking about money, all questions relating to and growing out of said treaty with the so-called Confederate states. Meaning, okay, now we'll play the role of your God and the good guy. You know, we create the problem, so we create the solution. First, you came together with a handful of other Moors who have certain lineages based on clans and tribes for the purpose of betraying other clans and other tribes. But now you're getting too close to that tribes that you came together with, and we're feeling uncomfortable. So now we say we're going to take your stuff because, well, we helped you defeated those other people anyway, and you know what type of firepower we have, and you're already weak anyway because you all fought one another. But now you're getting too close to those other people you signed treaties with to betray your own brothers. Oh no, you have to prioritize us. Now when you're beginning to prioritize the United States now comes and say, okay, now that you are stepping away from your other brothers and sisters, we'll come in between you and play the good guy. We'll settle this stuff. And said Treaty of Peace and Amity promised to enter into treaty with the Creeks to arrange and settle all questions relating to and growing out of said treaty with the so-called Confederate states. Remember, the so-called Confederate state is what the Creeks signed treaties with, which caused them to be far from the United States, which the United States considered as a violation of another treaty that was signed with them. Therefore, they were taking the land of the Creeks. So now the Creeks reneged. And then the United States said, since you reneged now, we'll come in between you and the so-called Confederate states and assist you with that also. They always want to play the hero, put themselves in a superior position, slow and steady. Now, therefore, the United States by its commissioners and the above named delegates of the Creek nations, the day and year above mentioned, mutually stipulate and agree on behalf of the respective parties as follows, to wit. How do we play the role of the good guy? Let me show you. Just like any body of law, different articles speak about different subject matter. But the part we're looking for here, that I'm here to show you as to where you screwed up and you should not screw up, because that's the key, not screwing up. It's the key to your inheritance, is in Article 2. The Creek hereby covenant and agree that henceforth neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, otherwise than in punishment of crime, wherefore the parties shall have been duly convicted in accordance with law applicable to all members of said tribe, shall ever exist in said nation. In other words, there's no slavery unless you committed a crime. And listen to this, inasmuch as there are amongst the Creeks many persons of African descent who have no interest in the soil. They're not referring to those brought from transatlantic. They are referring to those who were fought against during the Civil War that we read earlier. Remember those readings of them fighting against one another when they moved them across the Mississippi? Right. Those guys were the ones renamed as African descent. A significant number of indigenous people of the Americas had been relocated from the southeastern United States to Indian territories, designated spots for someone to be stripped of what rightfully belongs to them, west of the Mississippi. Those guys were the ones enslaved. Those here in the Americas the original inhabitants, were enslaving one another. And they themselves were reclassifying themselves. See, most Moors will want to tell you that the United States Census Bureau did this and did that to them. But on the same note, will tell you the United States Constitution was adopted based on the original inhabitants. And the structure of the United States was based on the original inhabitants, meaning someone assisted the United States to create it. We mentioned that and we showed that origin in the congressional law in this video right here. They will tell you that the United States mimics the original people, and at the same time tell you the United States were the one who turned you into African descent people. But the treaty between the United States and the Creek is telling you that brothers and sisters enslaved themselves. The United States didn't call you Africans. You did that to yourself. And the United States just played the devil's advocate and just added salt to injury. Take self-responsibility as to what you've done to yourself. You want true freedom? Deal with the bitter truth. And inasmuch as there are amongst the Creeks many persons of African descent, this African descent is not transatlantic. This African descent is based on misrepresentation that brothers gave to their own fellow brothers because of commercial interests. Inasmuch as there are amongst the Creeks many persons of African descent who have no interest in the soil, it is stipulated that hereafter these persons lawfully reside in the said Creek country under their laws and usage, or who have been thus reside in the said country, and may return within 1 year from the ratification of this treaty. When they say country, they are not referring to the entire North America. They're referring to the geographical bounds of the Creeks, which were countries to their own, just as much as the state of so-and-so in today's world are countries to their own. And their descendants and such others of the same race as may be permitted by law of the said nation to settle within the limits of the jurisdiction of the Creek nation as citizens, shall have and enjoy all rights and privilege of native citizens, including an equal interest in the soil and national funds and laws, listen, including equal interest in the soil and national funds. This is what I mean when I say that fund, that trust fund from the 1865 treaty with the Seminoles and the United States. You have right to it, even if you are a different type of Indians in North America. Because this treaty in Article 2 affirms the fact that you have said right, even if you were able to trace your lineage back to the one doing the enslavement or not. There's an equal interest in the national fund. These are grants. And laws of the said nation shall be equally binding upon and given equal protection to all such persons and all other of whatsoever race or color, which is where they slipped all this trash in. This is part of the reason why you can see pale-faced people now wear costumes and pretend to be you in today's world. There are many more games that they played. Remember, this is a treaty between the United States and the Creek, whereby they're saying, all right, now we'll step in between you and solve the feud that you're having between the 5 civilized nations. You betrayed one another by coming together as 5 civilized nations to fight others. Okay, but now these 5 civilized nations are fighting amongst one another, because we instigated it. But now we're going to come in between you and play the God by reducing your power, by pretending that we're doing something good for everyone else. Therefore, we're going to say your brothers and sisters that you enslaved by using us as a tool of war, right? Now they have the right to this money as much as you do. And guess what? Everyone else who's not you, regardless of race or color, including everyone else that will be inserted later in the future to role play, because we know your offsprings will not know about it because we've inserted school, which we've read in that PDF when it comes to the U.S. syllabus that was released. Those schools, we've conditioned them to not even know how to read English. We've conditioned them to not care about this. Right. But we'll teach our children, though, and they'll be taking your place. They slipped that part in with very few words in between commas, such as comma of whoever race or color, comma. And they just casually go on to say who may be adopted as citizen or member of said tribe. Go on Google, type in so-and-so tribe or their chiefs. All you see is pale faces. This is how they're taking your monies, put into your treasuries of your tribe and your clans, by pitting you against one another, because they know you betrayed one another in the first place with one group or the other. And then they divided those other group or the other that came together. And then they came in between it to act as one who glues it back together. But in the process of gluing it, they reconstructed things by placing themselves subtly into the equation. Forget about personalities. Forget about all the ego trip you've heard. These are the realities that's affecting you now. Want to know about the $5 Indian and the fund and the money? Right. This is one of it. You are enslaving one another. I know saying this might sound a bit harsh. I'm telling you this over and over, not to make you feel bad, not to make you feel feudal, but to make you realize that is how you fell. You fell because you were enslaving one another. If that's how you fell, then the solution that you constantly seek by that sense of pride that you have when you call yourself so-and-so Indian, or you call yourself so-and-so tribe, or you say you're more, that sense of pride must be accompanied by the sense of unity. That's why the elders who speak about things from a perspective of more, they know what they're talking about, because they are prioritizing unity. When some other younger generations are coming to say, hey, I'm an Indian, I'm this tribe, I'm that tribe, they are dealing with division, because now you're going straight to the feudal system that caused you to start fighting with your brothers and sisters. You're picking it up from that end. Don't be lost in the sauce in the process of you trying to free yourself. No different than people saying that they have the right to be free and thus digging themselves deep into trash by putting private plates, by saying I have the right to travel, so I'm not going to use a license plate, but you don't know how contract and trust law works. No different than saying you have a right, but you're going in the court to say you don't have jurisdiction over me, yet your physical body is present. No different than saying you can't do anything to me, yet the presumption is that you're a slave, so you don't show up. They're going to issue a warrant and come pick you up. There are things in between the line that are very subtle, which are the substance of the reality that you must know to enforce. But you can only do so if you have the eyes to see it. The issue of nationality and right to land is the exact same way. Start by being truthful to yourself and do the opposite of what caused you to fall. Because that is how third-party tortfeasors are slipping themselves into the equation, because of your division and your feud among one another. Don't get carried away with the pride of saying you are this tribe or that tribe. Come together. That is the only way anyone else from the other part of the world will give the slightest amount of care about who you say you are. That is the only way nature's law will recognize you. Treaty with Choctaw and Chickasaw, 1866. This is around the same time that the first Civil Rights Act was released. Around 1860s, 1861 and so and so. All that connects directly to this. They are not different sequence of events. The first Civil Rights Act that was released was around 1866. That's when all these tribal treaties that benefits the United States, so long as you stay divided, that was when all these treaties came about also. That's the reason why they were confident and bold to be able to create Civil Rights Act, because they know you are divided enough. And those Civil Rights Acts link back to some of the rights that you have. And some of them is hidden in these treaties. And some of them is clouded in these treaties based on the subversion of the United States and its subsidiaries. Treaties with Choctaw and Chickasaw, 1866. 14 Stat 769, ratified June 28, 1866, proclaimed July 10, 1866. Indian Affairs Laws and Treaty, Volume 2, compiled and edited by Charles J. Kapler. I also implore you to look into this family name and look at the current people who carry this family name and when this family name was changed to something else. But we're not going to go into that. Let's go to the core of this. What we're looking for here is Article 3. Remember, the first one we read was with the Creeks, which showed that they enslaved themselves, they subverted the names of their brothers and sisters, and then the United States came in and used that to their detriment. This one is with the Choctaw and Chickasaw, which is two of the 5 civilized tribes. The Creeks were one of the 5 civilized tribes. Choctaw and Chickasaw were also one of them. The Choctaw and Chickasaw, Article 3, in consideration of the sum of $300,000, hereby cedes to the United States the territory west of 98° west longitude, known as the leased district, provided that the said sum shall be invested and held by the United States. When something is held, make no mistake, it's been held in trust. And this is 300,000 in 1866. And this trust is still being funded as we speak. And it's also yielding interest. Not the same interest that some typical savings account that barely is noticeable based on shadow banking, whereby the interest rate of those printing the money kills the interest rate of the savings account that you're supposed to make. Not that type of interest. A huge amount. Considerable amount. Provided that the said sum shall be invested and held. Meaning the United States gave Chickasaw $300,000 for some land. And that $300,000 is being invested and held by the United States. Look at how they played that game. United States came to the Chickasaw and Choctaw and said, hey, give us your land. We'll give you $300,000 for it. But you know what? We'll hold it in an escrow. In case you don't know, the financial term for what's going on in this first clause is an escrow. Like with mortgages. An escrow doesn't even have to always be related to mortgage. But that's technically what's going on here. Whereby an escrow is just someone saying, all right, I'll put money here into this third party bank. And until you perform certain conditions, you cannot take that money out. Just show the third party that you've met the condition of the contract that we signed, and then you can take the money out. In other words, a trust fund, an escrow. The Choctaw and Chickasaw, in consideration of the sum of $300,000, hereby cede to the United States in territory west of the 98° west longitude, known as the leased district, provided that the said sum shall be invested and held by the United States at an interest not less than 5%, in trust for the said nations. When people say United States is a trustee, United States is a trustee, United States is a trustee, this is one of the reasons why. When they tell you United States is a trustee without showing you why, based on treaties, black and white, they're omitting truth from you. At that point, all you're just getting is speculation. You can yell and scream United States is a trustee all you want. You can yell and say United States has a fiduciary responsibility or that the fiduciary trustees all you want. If you don't know how and why, you're just delusional. You cannot hold anyone liable, and you cannot do anything functional with that information you've heard from someone. But here it is in black and white for you. It's held at 5% in trust for said nations until the legislature of the Choctaw and Chickasaw Nation, respectively, meaning each of them, shall have made such laws, rules, and regulations as may be necessary to give all person of African descent, meaning their own fellow brothers and sisters that they enslaved, that was instigated by the United States themselves. See, this is almost comical when you really see the spectrum of what the United States is doing. They're making you pay for betraying your own brothers and sisters. You can't point fingers at them. You did this to yourself. So fix it. The power is in your hand. It's in trust until you do certain things. Resident in the said nation at the date of Treaty of Fort Smith, which is what established another trust fund, and their descendants hereto held in slavery among said nations. Meaning these Chickasaw are holding their own brothers and sisters in slavery under the title of African descent. Because obviously at this point, we all ought to know that the transatlantic slave trade is BS. And the Civil War is what caused them to misnomer their own brothers and sisters as Africans. Because they've been enslaved. But given the fact that these nations are suzerain in nature, the United States has no choice but to hold it in trust. See, the silent thing that's going on here is the reason why the United States is holding this money in trust is because there's an emperor involved in the situation, commanding the United States to behave this way. That's the stuff they don't blatantly tell you here. Because during this time, the whole North Americas was part of something called Prussia. Where you hear people talk about Tartary, all that. Right. So the United States can play the game they want, but still they can only hold it in trust. They're getting land from you. Whatever you give them, they cannot own it and do whatever they want with it. They can only hold it in trust, which should now cause you to ask the question, who's really in power? If the one giving you money for your land cannot even take it and put it to use, but hold it in trust to be given back to you until you create laws and rules to free your own brothers and sisters. Do you see what's going on? Most so-called black people are so lost and confused. It just makes other Moors from other part of the world place their hands on their head and go, oh no, is this really happening? We are tired of seeing that. Because most of your brothers and sisters here that will tell you about being a Moor and give you a sense of pride about nationality will not show you this. But you need to see and read this so that you see the proper perspective of how you fell and what you need to do to fix yourself. Granted, some information has to be preserved and its integrity has to be kept sacred. But if you have a bad intent and you just want to jump into this, you're not going to be successful. But nonetheless, at least birthright of yours is information. So you must know this. Someone is telling you about nationality and they're not showing you these treaties. Something is wrong with the equation. Or at least mentioning these treaties. Something is wrong with that equation. Resident in said nation, until legislature of the Choctaw and Chickasaw Nation respectively shall have made such laws, rules, and regulations as may be necessary to give all persons of African descent, their own brothers and sisters that they enslaved through the Civil War, resident in the said nation at the date of the Treaty Fort Smith, and their descendants heretofore held in slavery among said nations, and all rights, privileges, and immunities, including the rights of suffrage of citizens of said nation, except in the annuities, monies, and public domain claim, public domain, men and land, by or belonging to said nation respectively. Isn't this similar to the language of the Civil Rights Act, whereby everyone, regardless of who you are, shall not be enslaved, and your rights shall not be annulled? And also to give to such persons who were residents as aforesaid, and their descendants 40 acres of each land of said nations on the same term as Choctaw and Chickasaw. Oh my God. You've heard of the 40 acres and a mule, right? Do you know the origin of it? Did you know the origin of that is in the 1866 Treaty with Choctaw and Chickasaw, Article 3. 40 acres of each land of said nations on the same term the Choctaw and Chickasaw shall be given to the people misnomered as an African slave, your fellow brothers and sisters that you betrayed. And you shall give them some of that monies. And we're not giving you back the money until you give back the land that you took from them. See how the United States is putting themselves in a superior position? Meaning the only way you can be free from the bounds of the United States, if you say you are more, is to come together with your brothers and sisters here in the Americas first. It's right here in the treaty. This treaty exists to bring you together. When I say the system is perfect, I know what I'm talking about. The system is perfect because it's meant to benefit you. What are you doing? Are you just saying you're a Moor? Are you just saying that you're Cherokee and you're still sect tripping? You're still saying I'm separate, I'm different from these people? And you think you're going to claim some land? And you think you're going to be free just because you're saying you're some tribe? All right. Keep fighting amongst one another and keep having that separate state of mind and keep thinking you're going to be free. All right. But just know that nature's law will keep compelling you to be a slave, no matter what you call yourself, no matter what you put on you, unless you really comprehend the importance of coming together. To be selected in the survey of said land. Remember, this video purpose is based on land and your ability to take it back. After the Choctaw and Chickasaw and Kansas Indians have made their selections as herein provided, and immediately on the enactment of such laws, rules, and regulations. Believe it or not, some of these laws are based on trust. When you come together through trust. The said sum of $300,000 shall be paid to the said Choctaw and Chickasaw Nation in a portion of 3/4 to the former and 1/4 to the latter. That's equivalent to who holds power and position relative to the United States. Less some such, at the rate of the $100 per capita, and shall be sufficient to pay such person of African descent before referred to within 90 days after the passage of such laws, rules, and regulations shall elect to remove and actually remove from said nations respectively. You are to get 40 acres and some monies. Moors in North America, freedom will never occur unless you come together. You have no choice but to come together. That's where your 40 acres and a mule comes in. And then the rest of this treaty goes about Negroes and whatnot. But this particular portion relating to land and the importance of nationality, when it comes to a unified perspective as to how you fail, you cannot look. If it's not clear at this point, you cannot take back any lands, and you cannot put yourself in a proper place over those pretending to be you if you are still fighting against your brothers and sisters, because there are treaties that are enforceable as such. Otherwise, someone else will keep using your trust fund to keep role-playing you and keep dominating you. You have to come together. You are seeing it in black and white here. Moving on. Tribal Treaty Database. Treaty with the Cherokee. Remember, we've read the Creek, we've read the Choctaw and Chickasaw. That's 3. Now the Cherokee, which is 4, written in the same year, 1866. In this video, I've shown the details of the first Civil Rights Act, which was also done in the same year, 1866. This video, all of this links and connects together. All this also links and connects together as to this video that I show as to how and why court is banked. This video. A step at a time does it. Now to the 4th one, the Cherokee Treaty with the United States in the same year, 1866. The part of this particular treaty we're looking at is the 2nd article. Amnesty is hereby declared by the United States and the Cherokee Nation for all crimes and misdemeanor committed by one Cherokee on the person or property of another Cherokee. They're telling you, look, we know you're fighting amongst one another, and we know you have enslaved one another because your system permits such to occur. Now we, the United States, are playing the role of saying, okay, we'll be the middleman to say, look, come together, okay? Stop having civil wars. Stop fighting amongst one another. Whatever crimes you've committed against one another, amnesty has been created by this treaty, or of citizens of the United States prior to the 4th day of July, meaning before this, July 1866. Anything that occurred as a crime or misdemeanor against your own self, this should squash it with this treaty, okay? All right. No right of action arising out of wrongs committed in aid or in the suppression of the rebellion shall be prosecuted or maintained in the court of the United States or in the court of the Cherokee Nation. Meaning, don't fight against one another. Come together. See, as much as these third parties called the United States might want to play the role of the good guys, they give you jewels as to what you need to do. But they trust that you're never going to come together because there's always spiritual elements involved in this. There's more to this than what meets the eyes. So they can be bold enough to put this out here and you might not even see it. And when you see it, you get carried away by saying, hey, I'm a Cherokee. I'm not this. I'm not that. I'm not a Moor. All right. All right. You keep doing that. But the Cherokee Nation stipulated and agreed to deliver up to the United States with their duly authorized agent any and all public property, particularly ordnance stores, arms of all kinds, and quartermaster stores in their possession or control, which belongs to the United States or the so-called Confederate States, without any reservation. Do you get the point? Do you see that even though you begin to figure out a little bit about who you say you are, you have to come together to really have a right of claim. There's a reason why some elders who speak about being more speak about it from a point of unity rather than division. They know this. It is up to us to read this and to corroborate that with the fact that they're telling you about unity. From the sense of being a more, not unity from whatever else people call themselves. Because that term more is a blanket pedigree that brings all of you together and ties you back to the old treaties you have with your brothers and sisters from other continents. It ties you back to those treaties because those treaties acknowledge the fact that all these continents used to be one before it split. That's another story along the same line, but let's focus and let's keep going along this line. That's the focus in the second article. We're not going to go into the other ones, which entertain many other subject matters and mentions the creeks and the Canadian district, all that stuff that connects all of it. But when it comes to you coming together, there's a very particular part of certain treaties with certain confederacies that first worked with the United States to screw their brothers and sisters over. And then the United States flipped the game on them and said, we're going to play your God now since you betrayed one another and put you in a subservient position until you come together. That's the reality that most people who speak about nationality don't want to speak of because it makes them look weak. It does not make you look weak if you're being honest about where your solution is. Most people would rather omit truth from you in the process of trying to make you feel good, when in truth you're working blind. The art of war lets you know you have to know your terrain, know how you got to where you were, know how you got to where you currently are, which is the fact that you were fighting against one another. You did not like one another. Begin to work together again to make things work. If you don't do that, no one else in other part of the world will fuck with you. I'm letting you know that right now. That's the reality of it. Sounds a bit harsh, but it's the truth. Here's the fifth one. The treaties with the Seminole. Remember the 5 civilized tribes. We went over the Creek first, then we went over the Choctaw and Chickasaw. That's 3. Then we went over the Cherokee. Now, the Seminole, the 5th. The same year. 1866. The particular article we're looking for is in Article 2, which has similar, if not the exact verbiage, as the one with the Creeks. The Seminole Nation covenant that henceforth in said nation slavery shall not exist. Why is this treaty talking about slavery not existing? It's because they were enslaving one another. Nor involuntary servitude except for and in punishment of crime. Similar verbiage as the Creek. Because they were all performing the same thing against their brothers and sisters. Whereof the offending party shall first have been duly convicted in accordance with law, applicable to all members of said nation. And inasmuch as there are among the Seminoles many persons of African descent and blood, meaning their own brothers and sisters that were misnomered. Because we all know that thing called African slave trade is trash. They were moved over the Mississippi. That's the reason why the first part of this video showed the Civil War and what they did based on Reconstruction era. It's in plain sight in black and white. Who have no interest in property and soil because they were enslaved. And it was not their portion of land because they came from another patrilineal or matrilineal family. Yet, the larger tree of family, blood, and lineage links all these different tribes together. So brothers were fighting amongst brothers, and thus a third party came and took their stuff. The third party is now playing the role of God, creating treaties like these, telling you, look, you should come together. Otherwise, we'll keep playing God over you. And no recognized civil rights. It is stipulated that hereafter, these persons and their descendants, and such meaning it applies to today, their descendants, and such other of the same race as shall be permitted by said nations to settle there, meaning you have the ability to claim lands, shall have and enjoy all rights of native citizens, and the laws of said nation shall be equally binding upon all persons of whoever, and this is the part they slip in there to benefit them, whoever race or color, who may be adopted as citizens or members of said tribe. Don't black people claim colors? They even give you a way out if you're saying you're black, but know that you can only go as far with that when it comes to trust and contract law, just so you know. So we read all those 5 different treaties with the same principles. We've shown the origin of how the treaty came about, word for word, based on Reconstruction era, based on a syllabus released by a U.S. agency office, and then a case law that shows, how people are being paid out and whatnot. In order for you to have the right to land, you must come together. That's the whole purpose of trust. Being organized. Organization is the key to power and inheritance. You were disorganized because you were busy fighting amongst one another. Someone else came in, took what's yours, and made you a slave because you were busy enslaving one another. Make the change. You have that power under the proper banner. Don't start having that gangbanger mentality that I am of this tribe, I am that tribe. That's what got you screwed up in the first place. Recognize who you really are. That's good. But come together under a pedigree. Because that pedigree is what ties you ultimately back to your brothers and sisters in the rest of the world. Until next time, we'll start to show how land patents really work, how you can flip the table in that game when it comes to lands. And you'll see how all these treaties play a role into it, and the trust funds that's sitting, waiting for you. That truly makes the United States a fiduciary trustee.